Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. It's time for part 3 of the Sandman retrospective, and we're past the halfway point of this incredible series. When we last left off, the devil had decided it was time for a career change and left Hell in the care of Morpheus, leading to several interested parties trying to buy it off of him. Until God stepped in and decided to exercise his right of, actually this is mine and I'm leaving these two angels in charge instead. Along with several standalones and interesting bits of history involving the Endless, we had a storyline featuring a mystical fantasy land and some kind of weird dream cuckoo bird, alongside a lot of transphobia. Not from any of the characters we like, mind you, but still. Creating a story that just felt, well, not quite finished. But hey, it's really hard to have a bad issue of this series, so it certainly wasn't awful. But let's dig into The Sandman, number 41 to 60, and see if we can pick things up a bit. Issue 41 begins a long storyline and another good one, Brief Lives. After we check in with the head of Orpheus, still alive and being taken care of by a family that watches over him, even has a tombstone to Johanna Constantine, we see that Delirium is kinda just drifting through the world, hanging out with beggars. She's reminded that her brother, the 7th member of the Endless we haven't met yet, is currently lost. Naturally, she decides to look for him in the most natural of places, a sex club. She rambles to herself that she wants her family back, mistaking a goth girl for Death, the Ankh necklace doesn't help, until she's eventually found by Desire. And if it wasn't evident by now, Desire's kind of an asshole, telling a woman who hits on them to go through an elaborate sequence of seducing another woman until she's so desperate for her affection that it leads to anger and obsession. Because I guess they want the emotion to just be as extreme as possible, no matter who gets hurt. Douche sire. Desire takes Delirium away to their realm, but all Delirium can ramble about is how much she wants their brother back. Desire says they don't care about him coming back and discourages her from pursuing this, but Delirium gets a good laugh at that. Well, you telling me not to want something. I mean, that's all you are, wanting. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it? Isn't it funny? Well, isn't it? I mean, it's not ha-ha funny, but it's amusing, I'll give you that. Since Desire won't help her, Delirium goes to see Despair, trying to get her to help her track down their brother. However, it seems Despair has moved on from her own wanting of him back, not caring if their brother is hurt or anything like that. As such, she decides she'll try Morpheus next, though both she and Despair know he won't help. We get some insight into Despair and her realm after Delirium leaves. She has windows that she can use to observe people who have fallen to her. People in pain, consumed by regrets and their overwhelming dread. She also self-harms as a distraction from her other emotions, as is demonstrated when she remembers her brother, allowing us to finally, briefly meet the final member of the Endless, Destruction. In 1665, the bubonic plague was ravaging a town, people dead or dying, some just from the despair of their situation, something of course the namesake of the Endless approved of. She meets Destruction as he watches things unfold too. However, he admits that things are changing. Despair denies that. Some things are changeless. People love and die, they dream, destroy, despair, go mad. They fulfill their destinies, live out the course of their lives. We fulfill our function as they fulfill theirs. True, but there are also a bunch of periods where they're just bored. Where's the Endless when you're just sitting on your couch, lazily eating potato chips and flipping through channels? Despite all that, Destruction keeps a chipper attitude and compliments Despair, wishing her well and says her face is pretty. 30 years later, in Destiny's Hall, Destruction would leave his responsibilities behind. Like Lucifer, he just quit. And as we established with Dream's imprisonment, while there might be a hiccup in existence if one of the Endless isn't around to do their job, ultimately the world keeps turning. Destruction not being around doesn't mean that things don't get destroyed. But whatever, let's move on to issue 42. Say, remember how in issue 40, Morpheus apparently started a relationship with somebody off-panel? Well, it took him a grand total of 2 issues for that relationship to drop off, as this woman has left the dreaming and returned to Earth. Morpheus melancholically declaring that she no longer loves him. Dude, have you considered that perhaps the problem is you keep moving way too fast with your relationships? You barely knew Nada before asking to marry her. You had a kid with Calliope. This woman moved in with you almost immediately. Do you even just, actually go on dates? With Mystery Woman gone, Morpheus decides to let it rain for a while in the dreaming while ordering Lucian to erase the suite of rooms made for her. I would appreciate it if the palace staff would be so kind as to refrain from mentioning her in the future when in my presence. Very good, Lord. No one ever really knew her name anyway, so it won't be hard. This is where we're formally introduced to another member of the Dreaming, Merv Pumpkinhead. He's another former horror host. No, he isn't. I was just kidding. But would you have been surprised if he had been? No, he's an original creation. Not a huge character, but he's around and basically a janitor, construction worker, and gardener in the Dreaming. He's got a working-class, blue-collar kinda New Yorker accent and attitude. Not really a major player in the series, but he's there and has shown up in a few background shots up to now. After a week of letting the rain go on and flooding parts of the Dreaming, Morpheus just doesn't get why she no longer loved him. Delirium shows up soon afterwards, and it's clear she's very disturbed and worried about what Morpheus will say to her because of past experiences, but he tells her that if he's been rude or behaved badly, he apologizes. She admits it's very different of him to be apologizing, and then explains how she thinks they should go find Destruction. Morpheus contacts Desire and asks them if they put her up to this, as well as inquiring if they are responsible for his recent breakup, and Desire confirms that they didn't either, swearing on something that was apparently sacred to both of them. So why don't you go back to your gallery, tell the little gleet to go buzz off and bother someone else so you can get back to feeling sorry for yourself? You'd think someone all about Desire would be feeling bad that Morpheus lost someone desiring him. As Delirium waits, we see her recall how she was once Delight, that the moment she realized what was happening, that the universe was changing, that she was growing older, she was no longer Delight. You can't delight in things as you get older. Sucks, but them's the facts. She went to meet Destruction over this, and he just reassured her that it was okay that things are changing, and there was nothing they could do about it. That reassurance to her was important. When Morpheus returns, she admits that if he says no, she'll ask Death and Destiny for their help, but if they don't accept, she'll go on her own after him. She's just worried that in her state, she can get easily distracted, and she can have really bad days. But no, Morpheus has decided to come with her, informing Lucian to make arrangements with a being on Earth named Pharamond who can provide transportation. He admits to Lucian privately that he doubts they'll find Destruction, but it'll provide a nice distraction from his recent romantic woes. Plus give the Dreaming a chance to drain the water and run some dehumidifiers to clean things up. Going into issue 43, we learn that there are people who are truly, truly old. Not immortal like, say, Vandal Savage, but have been around just as long, if not longer. We meet someone not that old, but going on 15,000 years, Bernie Capax, who does finally get killed in a construction accident. He's sad that that's what finally did him in, but at least he had a pretty good life for that time. Death reassures him that he got what anybody gets. A lifetime. Fair enough, Death, but some lifetimes are not as fulfilling as others when it's not really a solid unit of measurement. Anyway, since Morpheus and Delirium are traveling in the waking world, they're trying to be at least a little inconspicuous. Thus, they need to arrange human transportation, where this Pharamond guy comes in, now named to Mr. Feral and in charge of a large travel company. After some shenanigans where the receptionist keeps refusing to let him talk to Feral because of how busy he is, a series of disasters for his chauffeurs and agents that makes a lot more sense in hindsight, he finally goes to talk to Morpheus. Delirium, in the meantime, has been spontaneously creating little frogs. You think Death comes for the little frogs? Like, did Delirium create life, or are they just illusions? Delirium made up a list of some of Destruction's old friends, people who may have some clues to his current whereabouts. The lawyer is at the top of the list, and that was the late Mr. Bernie Capax, though Morpheus doesn't know of his current deadness. Another on the list, Etain of the Second Look, we soon see as she narrowly manages to avoid getting blown up in her apartment from a gas leak of some kind. We cut over to Destruction, surprisingly enough. Sure, he's missing his beard, but it's very clear by his hair color and happy demeanor that it's him as he makes a painting. He asks his talking dog friend Barnabas, of course Destruction's best friend is a talking dog, why wouldn't it be, what he thinks of the painting. Honestly, well, the perspective shot to hell, the colors could be better chosen, and the olive tree on the left looks like an overgrown stinging nettle. Okay, Barnabas, as someone who made an attempt at Bob Ross-style oil paintings in 2021, his art looks great. I don't know what you're talking about. In his gallery, the place where he could talk with the other members of the Endless, there's a big pool of water that acts as an early warning system that lets him know about trouble approaching, and it's going crazy. Back over to Morpheus and Delirium on an airplane, we learn that Pharaoh used to be a god in Babylon, but he was getting less and less worshippers as time went on, and Morpheus advised him to change career paths. Thus, he's been in travel ever since. Oh, I didn't know you could stop being a god. You can stop being anything. What about our brother? Morpheus facepalms at that. As I feel I've highlighted throughout this entire retrospective, the concept of change, particularly personal change, is at the heart of this entire series. And it's funny, despite being the Prince of Stories, which are frequently altered through retellings, remakes, editing, and re-releases, Morpheus seems the most resistant to anything changing. Also, I hate you, 1992. I know this is probably first class, but that seems like a hell of a lot of chair room even for that. After Dream has a conversation with a little girl about how you can get lost in dreams, the two meet their chauffeur and handler for their trip, Ruby. She manages to get them to their car without dealing with customs or immigration, and is of course confused by their lack of baggage. But while she's curious about the two, knows enough not to inquire any further on who they are. And Morpheus may not like change, but he also has his own sense of style, as they've arranged a classic car to drive for their trip, bringing us to issue 44. After an opening where the Alderman, the second name on the list, senses approaching death and decides to transform himself into a bear, as you do when death is approaching, Morpheus and Delirium arrive at Capax's house, only to discover that he's dead, his wife and son not doing so well after this. The son especially. He came back from college, assumed his dad was the most boring man on earth, but has gone through all his stuff in the basement office and discovered passports, fake identities, gold Krugerrands, weird powders that he assumes are drugs, etc. He has no idea what to do with any of this and is just in bad shape over this, well, revelation is not the right word, because he has absolutely no idea what to make of his father now. Morpheus, being Morpheus, he is no help whatsoever in comforting this guy and just leaves. To further his trend of not understanding people, when Ruby explains that their next stop is 14 hours away and they're gonna need to stop at a motel at some point to sleep and shower, he's just confused by the concept. It is a really annoying, inconsistent thing about the character, because he obviously does understand a lot of human concepts and feelings, yet then in the next storyline will act completely baffled about human things or people being upset about stuff. You can't chalk it all up to him being something beyond human, because he interacts with humans all the time, especially in their dreams. And while we laugh about dreams oftentimes making no sense, dreams frequently feature the familiar in them just as much. We have mundane, nothing dreams all the time. I've dreamed of walking in a parking lot and then tripping and falling, which will often wake me up. There's nothing weird about that, it's just a thing that can and has happened, but Morpheus is the kind of guy in some issues who'd be like, "How can you trip? Why not just float, mortal?" After stopping in the motel, we learn quite a bit about Ruby and her hopes and dreams for the future, and it won't mean diddly in a bit. But first, Delirium. After summoning up some animals via soap bubbles, she lets herself be lost in the meaning of the list, trying to locate the people she's written down. Capax is indeed dead, Etain has taken refuge somewhere, the Alderman is a bear, but she does manage to make contact with the Dancing Woman, who's currently working at a strip club. Morpheus, in the meantime, contacts Lucien to check in and see how things are going. Everything's fine, and while Morpheus expresses again that he has no desire to actually find his brother, he does realize that it's a hell of a coincidence that the first person they were looking for, an immortal no less, should just happen to die the day before they come to talk to him. As such, he wants to know if someone is actively trying to stop them for some reason. After the call, Morpheus has a flashback to meeting Destruction hundreds of years ago while on a walk with the Corinthian. He also demonstrates how the Corinthian kinda sucks at his whole nightmarish reflection of humanity thing, because Morpheus is so much better at it. A guy tries to pickpocket his ruby, and he tells him that he's gonna make him dream every night of a hangman's noose around him. You could simply have taken it back from him, you did not need to do that. Morpheus, Prince of Pants Crapping. Destruction talks about how humanity is trying to move on from superstition and religion into reason and science, but he's not seeing it as anything positive. Destruction's point in the Endless is that to build something new and better, something old must be torn down and destroyed, the past giving way to a new and better future. But he's feeling like it's not really improving, just changing. He's gone through the same cycle again and again. Bear in mind, he's not just destruction on Earth, but in all realities. It all follows the same path. Flames that destroy everything. Meanwhile, the Corinthian eats the eyeballs of a caveman that was being dissected. Without any seasoning or anything? Ugh, you are a nightmare. And then Morpheus wakes up from his flashback to find the entire hotel on fire, with firefighters trying to get him to move. Their best guess on what started the fire was Ruby falling asleep in bed while smoking a cigarette, and thus learning her backstory and whatnot was kinda pointless, except for a critique I'll have of the storyline later. Morpheus meets Delirium in the parking lot and explains that they're responsible for Ruby's death since she was only doing this to help them. What's more, it's too big a coincidence that both K-Pax and Ruby died while they were on this quest. Delirium just takes this to mean that she gets to drive the car! Oh hey, there's still some delight left in her. Always finding that silver lining. And heading into issue 45, yup, she's doing just that, leading the cops on a chase.
Why is that car making that noise? Whoop, whoop, and flashing its lights at us?
I have no idea. Perhaps the driver wishes to talk with you. Prince of stories, except for any that feature the police, I guess. They stop for the cop, but after he yells at them and wants to see her driver's license, Delirium makes him think there are invisible insects all over him for the rest of his life. In a parallel to what happened in the past, Morpheus asks her if that was necessary, and she gives mostly the same response he did to Destruction. It's clear that our hero has changed since then, even if he doesn't realize it. Still, Morpheus doesn't want to just poof over to the next target due to them starting this in the waking world and wanting to finish it there. As such, Delirium needs some driving help. He summons Matthew for that, and he has a difficult time explaining to her how she needs to drive on the right. Okay, Matthew, to be fair, they were in England before coming here. They finally arrive at the strip club where the dancing woman, Ishtar, works. We've been seeing bits of insight into her life alongside a friend of hers and how she's mostly okay with where she is now. She used to be the actual goddess Ishtar. It's not terrible, and we get a complete picture of her life and who she is now. But I don't know, much like A Game of You, it feels like we're getting a lot dumped about a character who doesn't actually end up mattering much to the overall plot. It admittedly does give us some more insight into Morpheus, who disapproved of her and Destruction's relationship, turns out the two used to date, and arguably she can be seen as a metaphor about the nature of change. She explains later that gods and goddesses come from dreams, move into mortal lands, are worshipped and gain power, but eventually they lose supporters and return to dreams and whatever lies beyond. And while she seems to be fine, a discussion of love and how she only truly loved Destruction, all her other relationships failed, seems to indicate that she is most definitely not fine, and uses the opportunity to dance, really dance, and in the process destroy the strip club and everyone in there. None of this is bad, I just admit it feels a bit weak and not really helping the overall plot. But hey, one of the great things about the Sandman is that, even with my complaints about part of it, it feels like all the characters have rich lives. They're fully developed people. Even in A Game of You, while I felt the thematic and story elements overall just weren't coming together, all the characters felt alive and not just minor background elements. They were fully fleshed out, even if in very basic ways. And that's one of the best strengths of this series. Anyway, point is that it's clear Morpheus' patience for this whole thing has reached a breaking point, since he just uses his illusion casting ability to walk into the strip club and talk to Ishtar, past the manager and guards instead of trying to blend in. Ishtar has no idea where Destruction is, and he warns her that she may be in danger given everything else that's happened. But as demonstrated, she's just sad and put off by this whole experience and makes things go kablamo. Which seems like a dick move for all the innocent people there, but there's plenty of asshole behavior to go around. Case in point, Morpheus! In issue 46, he tells Delirium that they're giving up the search. He's decided that all they've done is bring death and damage to the people they seek, and he refuses to let that keep happening. Delirium, disheartened, returns to her own realm where it's very clear she's lonely and wanted the company, believing that none want her. Morpheus informs Farrell about Ruby's death and where they can pick up the car. However, it seems he's not quite ready to totally give up the search. He recalls that the goddess Bast had offered him information on Destruction's whereabouts back in Season of Mists, so travels in dreams to talk to her. She admits she doesn't actually know where he is, but knew of his whereabouts 60 years ago, being in Paris. She does say that he needs to consult an oracle to find him. Morpheus says that no oracle can find members of his family, but then recalls that there is one that could and ends the dream. I feel like Bast kind of illustrates the point a bit better than Ishtar, though really it's about them all repeating the theme. She has few, if any, followers left thousands of years later, and thus she's not really as powerful as she once was. It's where the title of the storyline comes from. Even the gods lead brief lives. Thousands of years might seem like a lot, but when you're in your twilight years, does it really feel like it's still that long? I mean, except for Hob Gadling, that dude's still partying like it's 1699. Lucian informs Morpheus that something has happened in his gallery. Delirium's portrait, which he uses to communicate with her if he should so desire, has gone black. He summons Death to him, who's pissed because she blames him for whatever has caused her to close off her realm. She tells him that he has to go talk to her, that he's the one that put her in this mood and he's the one that'll get her out. She also accuses him of taking out his frustration about his recent failed romance on her, and she's kinda correct there. He ventures into the surreal realm of Delirium and actually finds his way to where she is pretty quickly. He apologizes for what he did by sending her away and admits that he was kinda moving through the waking world as an excuse to try to run into his ex, the one that recently left him. Don't be too hard on yourself, Morpheus. You're not the first guy who hoped to run into his ex and somehow work things out with them. At least you admit it was wrong. He says he really does like her and wants to resume the hunt, leading us into issue 47. During all this, Destruction has continued his artistic endeavors, and now is taking up cooking, thinking that it's a form of art as well. Barnabas is doubtful of his chances, especially since his last effort, a marble statue, didn't exactly go great. I really hope this isn't the only thing he's been doing for 300 years. Artistic skill does take time to develop, and I would have thought he'd have made some progress in that time. Oh god, Destruction's gonna get into AI art, isn't he? With the list of names not working, Morpheus decides their next best chance is to just go ask Destiny, since he knows everything. Destiny's realm is entered through mazes, the narration saying that all labyrinths are in fact the same one, and you just need to find the center. Unfortunately, along the way, you tend to run into minotaurs and the frozen body of Jack Torrance. Eventually, they make it to the center, a timeless place full of shadows of the past and future, but that's not what's important here. They reach Destiny, who advises them to abandon this quest, but Morpheus says that he can't. He does apologize to Morpheus, though, and I suspect I know why. The actions that follow this will eventually lead to the end of the book, but we'll be getting to that later. He also tells him this: "She does not love you, and truly, she never did. She will not change her mind, no matter how long nor how deeply you wish that this were the case. You will see her but one more time, long after all this is over, and the outcome of that meeting will not be satisfactory for either of you."
Every party needs a pooper, that's why they invited you.
Destiny tells him the same thing that Bast did, that he needs an oracle, and there is one in the family. Delirium collects herself enough to tell Destiny off as Morpheus collapses, knowing what he has to do.
You know why I stopped being Delight, my brother? I do. There are things not in your book. There are paths outside this garden. You would do well to remember that.
It is refreshing to see you so collected.
Stick it! Coins have two sides. Destruction told us that when he told us he was leaving. But I knew it already. You did too.
If Morpheus is defined by his sense of duty and responsibility, then Destiny is 10 times that. He knows exactly what will happen, but feels bound by it. It simply is because that's what he is and what he knows. The idea of breaking that, of doing something completely different than what's defined in the book, is completely alien and incomprehensible to him, even though he knows that he could do it. But like Morpheus, he's finding it difficult to change. Morpheus pulls himself together, relenting on what he has to do, and they head out. Destiny flips through his pages, the totality of experience of the future and past. He sees the meeting where Destruction declared that he would be leaving. He sees Morpheus returning from a distant galaxy in triumph over some occasion, outlined in the prequel I've mentioned before, Sandman Overtures, right before he's imprisoned by Burgess. Death befriending a mortal in China during one of her days as a human. The future, where the King of Dreams is now in white and there's blood on the throne. A reborn Corinthian also there, but he finally settles on a particular passage to read. When Morpheus and Delirium arrive on the island where the head of his son, Orpheus, is guarded. The guards eventually let him pass, and Delirium apologizes for what he has to do. Off-panel, he speaks to Orpheus, and now knows where Destruction is. And thus they head out and meet Destruction, who's waiting for them.
And you, my brother, you also seem different. Perhaps you too have grown. It is not likely.
I don't know, John D. might disagree with you there, dude. He's prepared a feast for the two, bringing us to issue 48. Delirium recounts their entire journey to Destruction in her own unique way, her hair and demeanor changing the whole way through. They talk about the family, how it was hard on them when the first Despair was destroyed and the new one took up the spot. Destruction says that's why he chose to do this the way he did. Not just die, but abandon his post. Otherwise, some other aspect of him would have taken the job and been stuck in the same position he was. Delirium said that everything was nicer with him around, but he's made his decision, and he can live with them being slightly unhappier. Morpheus admits that he originally went on this quest because Delirium wanted company on the trip, but it became a matter of honor for Ruby's sake. She died because they went looking for him, and it seemed wrong to have her death mean nothing.
300 years ago, you would have told me that she was simply mortal, and would have died later had she not died then. I doubt I have changed that much. I suppose I had vaguely hoped that you had changed, my brother, that you'd noticed that there were other people in the world, that you had begun to see people as other than things that dream, as creatures of stories. Or at least that you had finally figured out what the police are.
There's that word again. What does it mean? Is it those things with the flashing lights on top of it, or is it what those women in the strip club were doing? Morpheus is kind of annoyed by that remark, but it's not unwarranted as we've seen, that he takes his responsibility seriously and doesn't appreciate Destruction commenting on that when he abandoned his. Destruction admits that his realm is still around after a fashion. After all, things still get destroyed and created, things still get torn down and rebuilt. The difference is that it's not his responsibility anymore. It's in the hands of the mortals. And consequently, it's not his fault. He's only been on this island for a few years now. Otherwise, the last 300, he's been all around just doing stuff. Being an artist in places, helping to build a cathedral, spent a decade helping dig the Panama Canal. But he also admits that what was being done to all his friends and to Ruby, those were automatic safeguards he had set up in case anyone came looking for him. He only could have stopped them if he had resumed his duties, and, well, he wasn't going to do that. But the people who were hurt, some of them had been your friends. Douche-struction. Outside, he remarks on how stars give the illusion of permanence. He can pretend that things last longer than moments, but gods come and gods go, mortals live and die, and everything is transient. But it's nice to pretend. He recounts how he spoke to Death once while they were looking at the stars, and despite his nature as one of the Endless, he felt tiny and insignificant. Death told him that everyone is actually capable of knowing everything, just like Destiny does. It's just people pretend they can't to make life more bearable. It's a fair point. If I knew everything, that would mean I knew everything about Marvel. And there are some things that man is not prepared to know. The Endless to him don't need their responsibilities. They're just ideas and patterns and motifs, echoes of darkness and nothing more. They have no right to play with the lives of mortals. Destruction is needed since nothing new can exist without destroying the old, but it goes on without him, so he's gonna live his own life. Even the Endless are not endless. They'll only exist as long as the current universe exists, and certainly not their individual aspects, which can indeed be harmed and come to an end. Destruction plans to leave again since he doesn't want to be found by them in the future. Life, like time, is a journey through darkness. So pack a flashlight. Morpheus, according to everyone else, blamed himself for Destruction leaving, though he keeps denying that, and we can't know for certain why he would think that. Still, Destruction tells him not to blame himself, and as a gift to Delirium, has Barnabas go with her. Just as well, he kept being kind of a dick about his artwork. Constructive criticism is one thing, but you probably should find a dog that's a bit more supportive of your efforts, man. He also tells Dream that if he sees Ishtar again, to give her his love. Why don't you go do it, dude? You're a free agent now. Go nuts. Also, didn't you say she met her end? Whatever. He floats off into space. And now Morpheus has a very important job to do. He has to kill his son. Jeez, Morpheus, did you learn nothing from this trip? It's all work with you. Issue 49 and the conclusion of Brief Lives. Morpheus returns to Orpheus's island to speak with him. He says that Calliope came to visit him last year, telling of how Morpheus freed her. You have changed since the old days.
I doubt it.
Take note of the fact that everyone keeps telling him that he's changed, yet he denies it. Morpheus does not want to accept that he's changed, because to change would mean that not everything is as immutable as he wants it to be. If things are more than just what they are, then maybe he doesn't need to have his responsibilities. Maybe destruction was right. Maybe he can have things he'd like. But at the same time, that would mean that he's wasted so much of himself, so much time and effort and pain and hardship to hold on to something that he doesn't need to. But anyway, disembodied head.
You asked for a boon, Orpheus. I can grant it.
My nose has been itchy for 500 years, Father. Please help me.
No, the boon is for him to finally die. I would have asked for a new body, but sure, just have your dad kill you. That works too. Apparently he asked for this a long time ago, but Morpheus had refused, saying that his life and death were his own and that they'd never meet again. Orpheus wishes things had been different between them and that he's ready. And thus Morpheus kisses him on the forehead and does something to him. The silhouette seems to indicate he shoved his hand in his forehead and said hand is now bloody, but did he just phase through and squeeze his brain or something? For all we know, he could have put his hand in his neck and operated his head like a puppet. Either way, Orpheus is dead. Morpheus says it's what he wanted and that he's truly been dead since the Sisters of the Frenzy tore his body to shreds. Despair comes by to visit, no doubt sensing Morpheus' own emotions right now, but she's really more concerned with how Destruction was. She likes that he spoke fondly of her.
He wasn't wearing his beard anymore either.
I liked the beard.
Listen, he probably originally thought it was part of his responsibilities too, and was just happy he didn't have to deal with the itchy thing anymore. Is nothing ever good enough for you people? The three depart back to their own realms, Despair meeting with Desire. They admit that they had been trying to get Morpheus to spill family blood for a long time, even swore an oath to do it, but now they don't feel triumphant, just scared. Morpheus contacts the family who had watched over Orpheus and tells them that their responsibilities are over. Bury the head somewhere unmarked and they may do as they wish. From there, he acts a little strangely, telling the guards of his palace that he appreciates them, asking Nuala the fairy if she's doing okay, then retires to his study with Lucian. He tells Lucian he doesn't want to be disturbed, but he needs to arrange a few things. Rewards for those who helped him on his journey, a message for Ishtar before she goes beyond his power, and to inform the others from Delirium's list that they're safe to return from wherever they went. Tomorrow he can begin his work again, but for today, he retires to his room and puts on some casual clothes to sit in a chair and grieve. Dude, I totally relate. Order up some ice cream, queue up some episodes of Bluey. You need the day to yourself now. We end by checking in on everyone who's mortal and involved with this whole affair. However briefly in their lives we saw them. And with life itself, some are tragic, some are hopeful. Brief Lives is, ironically, probably longer than it needs to be. Still, in those 9 issues, we get a lot of interesting ideas about the nature of mortality, of change, of gods and the people who are likened to gods. Like with a lot of the Sandman, it ends up being more philosophical than anything else. Sure, there's violence, but situations are not resolved with violence. There's no angry confrontation with destruction, no bitterness or thrown glasses or anything like that. Destruction is pleasant and nice and has decided to separate himself from his family to make his own way. He loves them, but he can't be with them anymore because they're just a constant reminder of what he decided to leave behind. But let's move on to issue 50, the 2/3 marker of the series. It's a standalone one called Ramadan, and a good one. It's just I wouldn't have made it the 50th issue. I've said this before, but I feel like big milestone issues like that should be massive celebrations of a book. Things that reflect on stories past, some new information dropped, maybe looking to the future, but that's just me. Long story short, it's about the Caliph of Baghdad, Harun al-Rashid, observing the prosperity and magical beauty of the city, home to not only all too human greatness from various strata and professions, but also the fantastical, like animals that speak, and robots and anthropomorphic creatures, realizing that the glories of his city will eventually be lost. He's seen the ruins of ancient cities buried in the sand, and knows the same will likely befall his someday. As such, he manages to contact Morpheus and begs for the city in its greatness to be forever preserved in a dream. Morpheus agrees, and indeed, that version of Baghdad is kept in a glass bottle that he takes back to the dreaming, to be preserved for as long as humanity walks the earth. Of course, that also means that the Baghdad that comes out of it is not as great in that time period, and consequently it will suffer immense damage, as is told to a child in the closing pages. It's important to remember context here. This came out not too long after the first Gulf War, in a conflict that many believed America had no business being in, and many more who were very happy to be in it. And regardless of the war itself, Baghdad as a city is 1,200 years old. There's a ton of history there that's been damaged or destroyed over the centuries, and particularly in modern war situations. So it's a nice fantasy to believe that the city at its height could be preserved in some way. Otherwise, it being the 50th issue, they include some cool original artwork for the series as a bonus from various creators, including sexy Morpheus and Bast fan art. Damn, must be a cold night in the desert there with them dream nipples. I'll take phrases I never thought I'd say when I started doing this job 15 years ago for 200. You know, it's been a while since we had any major connection to DC lore in this book. Sure, Vertigo was a thing by now, but this book is still pretty firmly entrenched in DC continuity, right? What was going on with DC at the time? The countdown has begun. The countdown to 0 Hour! Yep, 0 Hour Crisis in Time was happening, and I suggest you go watch my videos on that from a few years ago if you've forgotten what happened there. And while 0 Hour and the players in it aren't specifically mentioned by name in the storyline, it's very easy to see this next storyline, World's End, as a tie-in to it. Part of 0 Hour's plot involved alternate timelines seeping into the main one, an amalgamation of possibilities, both good and bad, converging and needing to stop Parallax and Extant from erasing the universe to create their own. It was a storm of different realities. And that's what we've got going on here. But let's back up and get things going in issue 51. A man crashes his car at night from a combination of being tired, a strange creature appearing on the road, and a freak snowstorm suddenly coming up out of nowhere in June. Seeking help for the woman who is his passenger, the man, Brant, hears a voice calling out to him to come to a nearby inn, but he has to be sure it's there, though, or else it won't appear. Can't be good for revenue if your business plan is dependent on absolute certainty about the presence of a building in the middle of nowhere. He eventually makes his way with the woman, Charlene, to the World's End Inn, where the inhabitants, including several people from different time periods and various fantasy creatures like a centaur who acts as a surgeon, he uses an outdated term for it, which is a nice touch, they explain to him that they're all trapped there at the inn for the time being. The snowstorm isn't really a snowstorm. It's a reality storm, but we don't get into that for now. Brant passes out and wakes up to find Charlene mostly recovered and passing the time with the inn patrons. And what else would they be passing the time with but stories, which is what the meat of World's End is, an anthology of the inn patrons telling various stories. It makes me wonder if this was the inspiration for the 2008 House of Mystery ongoing series, which featured some recurring characters trapped in the titular house while patrons paid for their drinks at the bar with stories, making it both an anthology and a serialized story. You'd think, given that I tend to prefer the Sandman issues that are more about the overall plot than the done-in ones, that I dislike this, but honestly I can't help but be charmed by the presentation. I like anthologies. I've made multiple videos before about my love of horror anthologies in particular. World's End may not be my favorite of the series, but it's still a part of it, and they have some very imaginative work here. Beginning with this one, A Tale of Two Cities, about a man who leads a dull life in an office job, but loves to lose himself in exploring his city, until one day he boards a mysterious train, spots Morpheus just chilling on it. God damn it, Farrell, I know it cost you a fortune to get that old car back, but I feel like forcing me to take a train on my next trip is just petty. and ends up in a twisted version of the city, with stuff that seems familiar but nothing really looks right. He learns that perhaps this is what a city dreams of, and that kind of nightmarish quality to it is presented very well in this book, though he eventually moves out to the country for fear of one thing: what happens if the city wakes up? If it's anything like me, groggily stroll over to my computer at 3 in the afternoon and see what's up on Twitter. In issue 52, we get Cluracan's tale, reuniting us with the fairy whom we last saw presenting Nuala as a gift from the Queen of the Fae to Morpheus. He recounts how he was sent to disrupt a potential alliance between several villages and lands in a nearby kingdom. The ruler, who through legal chicanery has become both the religious leader and the political leader, is a rude, greedy, power-hungry piece of crap. When Cluracan says the wrong thing, the ruler has him locked up in cold iron chains, which the Fae have no power against, and could potentially leave him to rot. Fortunately, Cluracan ends up visiting Nuala in the dreaming as he sleeps and tells her of his predicament. She petitions Morpheus to help, and he's an accommodating sort, so for her sake helps him escape the iron. In turn, he uses his Fae abilities to foment a rebellion, then prepares to privately assassinate the ruler, only for the previous ruler to rise from his grave and kill him instead. Yeah, that's politics for you. The next generation always having to suffer because of the dead old guy from the last one. It's a fun little story. I have no real love for Cluracan in particular, but it's a neat little fantasy adventure story, and Morpheus' inclusion makes sense given the players involved. Next up in issue 53 is Hobbs Leviathan. It's not that interesting, about a youth who, after running away from home thanks to a desire to work at sea, joins a crew and boat owned by Hob Gadling. They have some minor misadventures, like a giant sea serpent. Hob talks about the value of keeping secrets for yourself, especially as he is very long-lived, but ultimately nothing of consequence. Issue 54 is The Golden Boy, and it is a weird one, owing itself to be a reinvention of a weird old DC concept. In 1973, DC released the short-lived series Prez, about the first teenage president. Which, yeah, technically, but he's 18, which is legally an adult, so... It's the whole New Teen Titans thing all over again, where they're technically teenagers, but 18 or 19. Anyway, point is, it was a bizarre little bit of satire that's gotten called back to on occasion over the years, usually to criticize and comment on American politics, and this is one of those cases. Amusingly, it says that with 18-year-olds being able to vote, said 18-year-olds were able to lower the age limit on elected officials, which is not how that works, but hey, the storyteller admits that this is an alternate reality. It's kind of a weird one, almost an attempt at likening Prez to a Christ-like figure, just with subtler symbolism. Prez is named as such because his mother wants him to be president. He fully embraces the American dream and what it means, while recognizing the amount of corruption and faults of America, but once he gains power, it's basically a breeze. Peace in the Middle East, lowered gas prices, etc. He's constantly tempted by Boss Smiley, an antagonist of the original miniseries, some kind of weird devilish figure who wants Prez to serve him, and he'll give him what he wants, but Prez resists even after his girlfriend is assassinated, in an attempt to gain the affection of the Justice Society superhero Wildcat of all people. Eventually, he stops being president after 2 terms, retires peacefully, eventually leaves to avoid all the people constantly asking him to come back, then dies. How he dies is a matter of speculation, but death takes him to the afterlife, run by Boss Smiley, who says that he belongs to him now. However, it seems Death intervened and contacted Morpheus, and since Prez is from the realm of stories and myth, he falls under his domain and takes him to safety, encouraging him to go and save other Americas and other realities. Unfortunately, his first stop is to the Earth from the Monument mythos, and he quickly decides that maybe some Americas are too far gone, and decides to retire again. It's a neat, optimistic little nod to the character, though I tilt my head a little. You see, there's a bit where Richard Nixon appears to Prez before he's elected, knowing he's going to be the next president, and Nixon tells him, "Yeah, you're not going to be able to change jack, dude. Just enjoy the ride. They won't let you change anything." But then there's no real conflict for Prez. You'd think there'd be, some oligarchical forces behind the scenes that impede his progress, power behind the throne kind of jackasses who prevent him from pushing his agenda, or he has to compromise to get what he wants and the youth turn on him or something. But nope, it turns out it's pretty easy to solve America's problems as long as you don't suck. Who'da thunk it? Next up in issue 55 is kind of several stories, all related to a character Brant meets. Klaproth, of the Necropolis Liturgy, a place that's all about burial rites and funeral arrangements and etc. The whole thing is titled Cerements, featuring the storyteller, Petrifax, assisting in a burial where the dead body is eaten by birds. Then those attending tell stories to each other of deathly rites, about a hangman, about an old teacher skilled in her arts, and even more brief stories. But most interestingly, a story and a story and a story about destruction entering the liturgy and recounting how it came to be. That there used to be another necropolis there, but the people who ran it were jackasses who didn't actually care about the work they did, throwing out the books of ceremony, doing nothing to really care for the bodies brought to them. But then the Endless came, ready to do the rites necessary for the first despair who had died. Those of the necropolis just laughed at them, and destiny took away the charter of their position, making their city decay into dust within moments, and granting one to a village that became the liturgy. Brant is a little annoyed when he can't hear more about something they talk about, a room deep in the catacombs of the necropolis that had a booming voice declare, "Which of them is dead?" A comic wikia editor when they learned that a new crossover event just came out. Brant thinks that they're all dead and that explains the weirdness of the inn, but someone else has another explanation, leading into our finale of the storyline, issue 56. She says that this is the inn at the end of all worlds, and they'll all leave when the reality storm is over. Charlene asks what a reality storm is.
Well, sometimes big things happen, and they echo. Those echoes crash across the worlds. They are ripples in the fabric of things. Often they manifest as storms. Reality is a very fragile thing, after all.
Yeah, Superboy Prime can attest to that.
When a world ends, there's always something left over. A story, perhaps, or a vision, or a hope. This inn is a refuge.
It's a neat little reference to DC's continuity, all the worlds and possibilities that end after one of these kinds of events. And hell, Zero Hour was only the second time they had done something like this, and yet even in 1993, Gaiman was pointing out how some characters' realities were shattered or made into leftovers thanks to these things. Charlene is kind of annoyed that all the stories they've told have been boys' stories. Now, to make it clear, women are of course perfectly capable of liking swashbuckling adventure or weird events, but it's in a tradition of boys' fantasy tales, and there weren't even any women in the stories. The whole thing is a metatextual critique on superhero stories at the time, just ambiguously enough that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on that. She laments her own life and how lame it is, that she has no story of her own to tell. Even Brant isn't someone she's very close to, they just shared the car ride to save money. She runs off in tears after saying that. Women, huh? What did I say? I mean, I didn't say anything. Well, you gotta laugh. Brant, Prez would be ashamed of you right now. The Centaur says that the inn is not a destination, just a place to rest upon the way, and that this is the second time he's encountered one, no doubt referencing the first crisis. Though amusingly, he also mentions that this is caused when two conflicting realities meet or overlap, in the same way natural storms are precipitated by the meeting of hot air and cold. A reference to the Vertigo and DC split. Although it should be noted that because all this is subtextual and not overtly stated, I could just be talking out of my ass here, and it's instead referring to an event in the Sandman narrative itself. Something that has only happened twice before, or in the future. The storm is interrupted by something outside, and everyone there looks out. Figures in the sky, huge and imposing, walking across it, led by Destiny of the Endless. It's a funeral procession, laid out over multiple two-page spreads, and goddamn, of course you get a master of the craft like Gaiman to know when to use two-page spreads to show something huge and impressive. At the end of the procession are Delirium and Death, who seems to turn and look at Brant as the moon becomes blood red. Everyone starts to leave the inn as the storm is over, but Charlene elects to stay behind, letting Brant go with a kiss on the cheek. When Brant returns, recounting all this to a bartender, "So the stuff with destruction in the necropolis had yet another story layer?" Charlene just doesn't exist anymore in the real world. The car is his, it's not damaged, and the company has no record of her. He just stayed out here, having quit his job, and he felt weird driving a car he knew wasn't his own. He apologized to the bartender if he bored her with all this, but she doesn't mind. After all, you hear a lot of weird stories behind a bar. World's End is not my favorite Sandman story, but it's definitely an interesting one for its anthology format, and, as I've said before, really demonstrates Gaiman's talent for infusing so much life into characters even when they have a short time to do so. Unfortunately, all stories must end, and we have reached the beginning of ours. The storyline that begins the end of the Sandman the kindly ones. We're not going to get through all the kindly ones today, but let's get it started with issue 57. The titular kindly ones are people we've met before, many times in the series. The Fates. They speak to each other in the opening pages. Some of it meta stuff about how the series will be ending soon. I mean, 18 issues isn't really soon, it's a year and a half, but still. And how dorks like me seem to always complain about what sort of stories they want or don't want out of things. It's never what they want, and if we give them what they think they want, they like it less than ever. It's a fair point, but sometimes the problem is the storyteller not actually delivering what the audience wants, just what they think they want. Although other times, yeah, there's no pleasing some people. Or you take an insanely long time to finish what you wanted to tell because it feels like the universe is conspiring against you, trying to tell a storyline in your comic review show. And anyway, remember Lita Hall? Her and Daniel have been hovering in the background for a while, and Lita's getting worse, growing increasingly paranoid about Morpheus' promise to claim her son. Even after all this time, Morpheus has still not stopped by to talk to her about everything. It's been years! He found time to go on the quest with Delirium, but not go talk to this woman and explain, hey, your husband actually had been dead for a long time, and those two nightmares were tricking you two, and I didn't kill him, and your son is going to be very important and cool in the future. Her paranoia grows when she finds sand in Daniel's bed, despite him not being in any sandbox for a long while, and then yelling at a homeless guy who just wanted to give Daniel a flower. Meanwhile, Matthew checks in with a bunch of the characters in the Dreaming to see how they're doing, including Nuala, who admits that she cleans the palace for Morpheus, despite him not asking her, simply because there's nothing else for her to do, before looking to Morpheus, who's recreating the Corinthian. As he's explained before, he crafted him to be a dark reflection of humanity. Imagine that you woke in the night and rose, and seemed to see before you another person whom slowly you perceived to be yourself. Someone had entered in the night and placed a mirror in your sleeping place, made from a black metal. You had been frightened only of your reflection. But then the reflection slowly raised one hand, while your own hand stayed still. Oh yeah, that's creepy and all, but my eyes are not made of teeth, so I know it's not me. A dark mirror. That was always the intention. But the gulf between conception and execution is wide, and many things can happen on the way. For instance, I was going to put a nose where his mouth would be. That didn't make it past the design phase. Morpheus is confident that the new Corinthian won't rebel against him like last time, but Matthew is admittedly more interested in learning about what happened to the previous Ravens who worked for him. He doesn't say much, though confirms that one ended up becoming human again briefly, but neither he nor Eve will discuss it any further. My guess? TikTokers making videos about stuff they find on the ground. Lita is finally convinced to go out and meet with a guy offering her a job. They even go to the nightclub Lucifer owns, and he plays the piano. He already knows about her former superheroine life, giving an abridged summary of her history with Hector. It had been a few years spread out for all these stories, after all, up to now. What exactly he wants to hire her for is not really clear, but his company is trying to do marketing, interactive media, management, the whole shebang. Lita, this is starting to sound like you're going to be shilling NFTs. Leave now! Well, she does have to leave, though. She has a sudden realization that something is wrong back at her place. She tries to call home, but gets no answer, the guy offering her a ride back. She busts down the door, and the place is a shambles, and Daniel is gone, bringing us to issue 58. Lita is not doing so well, almost reverting to the quasi-catatonic state she was in the dream world as cops try to interview her about Daniel's kidnapping. The babysitter was asleep on the floor, and it's clear she knows, or at least suspects, that Morpheus took Daniel, but can't really tell the police, a dude claiming to be the Sandman stole my child. So she's just very quietly answering all their questions. After they talk to her, they speak to Lita's friend Carla, who confirms she's not crazy, she's just upset about her son. They give her their card, but tell her not to try calling them for info. They'll follow up later. What's weird is that she should still have some friends in the superhero community. Sure, the JSA were out of action, both because of the Ragnarok thing and Zero Hour, but Infinity Incorporated members were around and they could have called in some favors. Makes me wonder if incidents like this led to the procedures they set up in Identity Crisis. A superheroine's son is kidnapped in a locked door mystery, and the magic users probably could have confirmed it wasn't Morpheus who did it. Back in the dreaming, Cluracan pays a visit to see his sister. He recounts the incident in his dreams that got Morpheus to rescue him, as well as what he saw at the World's End Inn. He recounted all this to Queen Titania, who sent him here to say that it's time for Nuala to come home. Yes, despite the nature of the World's End stories being mostly self-contained, even that has effects that are going to put everything in motion. Gaiman played the long game with a lot of this, and it all pays off. Nuala doesn't think Morpheus will release her, though it's very clear from the way she reacts to all this that it's more that she doesn't really want to leave. Back over to Lita, she has a nightmare wherein she meets the Furies, who inform her that they know who took Daniel and want to help her, but can't really give straight answers. Especially since she uses up her 3 questions, though in her defense, it's not like she knew about that. You could probably explain the rules to this stuff out of the gate. They do tell her she's met the ones who took him, though, and they plan to put him to the fire. Cluracan and Nuala go to Morpheus, who wants Nuala to say what she wants, but she says she's his and will only do what he says to do. After some talking, he agrees that she can go back, much to her shock, but then also grants her a gift for her service. She can use her amulet to summon him and ask for a boon whenever she would like. You think Morpheus would fall for the I wish for a million wishes thing? Nuala is pained that he didn't try to fight to keep her there, didn't care if she stayed or left, but, well, yeah, Nuala, you're your own person. Morpheus is a dick about many things, but aside from Nada, he's always been pretty good about people's free will. But hey, let's move on to issue 59. We discover who it was who kidnapped Daniel, and it's a bit of a surprise. Loki and Robin Goodfellow, aka Puck, last seen in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Loki recounts a time when he tricked Thor into thinking that the Thunder God was pregnant, stuck a cork in his ass, left him there for a few days, and eventually Ratatosk, the squirrel who lives in the World Tree, pulled it out and released several days' worth of poop.
We were 8 at the time.
Sure know how to paint a picture, Loki. And they put Daniel inside a fireplace. Guys, that is not how you make baby back ribs. We check in with Hob Gadling, whose girlfriend has sadly passed away, and he tearfully talks to her grave about how it never gets any easier for him to lose people he's loved, and he still remembers all the women he's been with. However, waiting outside the cemetery is Morpheus, the two deciding to get a drink. Things start to get weird for the other Endless. Destiny spots another version of himself in his realm. He knew it would happen from his book, but it's still weird. Desire closes off their realm temporarily to walk around naked for a bit. Despair shuts herself out a bit when she notices Desire closing off her realm, and Delirium suddenly remembers that Barnabas was supposed to be with her, but she seems to have lost track of him. Meanwhile, it seems Morpheus came to offer some consolation to Hob for his lost love. He can't, or at least won't, go back and restore her or anything, but he does offer him the chance to visit her in dreams every night. But Hob turns it down, not wanting to wake up with her not there. Morpheus does, however, acquiesce to the request that the person who killed her in the car accident knows exactly who he killed and who she was and how good a person she was. Morpheus then leaves, saying he shouldn't have come. Hob asks him if he's in trouble, but Morpheus denies this. He runs after Morpheus and says the stink of death is on him. He's come to recognize it after so many centuries, so he needs to take care of himself.
Thank you, Hob. I shall. A stronger deodorant I must invent.
Morpheus is in trouble, even if he doesn't realize it. But then, that's a debate that many have had about this series. Is Morpheus cognizant of what he's doing? Visiting Hob like this? Letting Nuala go without a word? Anyway, Lita, as you can see plainly from these panels, is doing just great as time goes on. Hell, that guy she met with even comes over to check in on her and say the job offer is still open, and then tries to seduce the woman whose child is missing and is staring blankly at nothing, and hey, have we reminded you lately that in another reality she was the daughter of Wonder Woman? Can't imagine why I'd remember that as she snaps his arm like a toothpick when he touches her without her consent. She's barely gotten any sleep by the time the police finally stop by to tell her that they found Daniel, or rather his body badly burnt. They even have a photo to show her and she insists on seeing it, and yeah, it's not pretty even with the stylized artwork, so I won't share that. Apparently there were people who didn't like the art for this storyline, and I have to disagree. The angular, very minimalistic art style works very well for Lita sequences, and the scenes in this issue with Hob are just gorgeously rendered. There's just so much atmosphere and great storytelling crafted in the shots. The almost fisheye lens of Lita in these sequences, her constantly open eyes until the red veins are popping, And then the final scene is Lita truly recalls her encounters with Morpheus and how she has to get her revenge, her face twisting into this horrible grin. And thus we come to issue 60, the last we'll be talking about today. Remiel, one of the two angels who took over Hell in Lucifer's absence, goes to speak to our pal the devil, asking if he's interested in coming back, and of course he isn't. What's more, he admits he has no respect for Remiel. Never did, even when he was an angel. And Remiel spitting on him finally gets Lucifer to tell him to leave, threatening him too because he still has his power even if he gave up his kingdom. However, we learn that after his departure, Remiel had also planned to talk to him about the situation with the Dream King. Speaking of that situation, Lita might be determined now to fight Morpheus, but there is the matter of actually finding the Furies so she can take her revenge. She seems to either be hallucinating or is trapped between the dream realm and the real one, walking along the streets in the real world disheveled, while in the dream one, encountering fantasy creatures as she seeks out the kindly ones. Goes to show how useful they are. They've been showing up all over the place in this series, but no one can actually find them when they're looking for them. It turns out that Lita's babysitter, the one who somehow fell asleep while watching Daniel, was Rose Walker, the former Dream Vortex. Also, she stopped doing the purple hair thing. Carla goes to see her, mentioning that Lita's gone, but more interestingly, the cops never went to speak with Rose. Hell, even the card they gave Carla has nothing written on it. She decides to look into it while Rose does her thing, doing some kind of writing project about sitcoms. Back in the 90s, before we could make video essays and retrospectives about this stuff, writing books about them was all we could do. It was hell. Lita, meanwhile, eventually comes across Theno and Uriel, two of the Gorgons from Greek mythology. Oddly, they seem to resemble the spider ladies from Rose's old boarding house from back a ways. But no, in case you're not familiar, these two are the sisters of Medusa, and they want Lita to become their new third sister. A Hydra and a nearby apple tree discouraging Lita from spending any time with them, but Lita's not exactly firing on all cylinders right now. Morpheus retrieves Lucien and Matthew for a task, overhearing Merv Pumpkinhead complaining about the weather, which even Morpheus says is putting him on edge. The weather is controlled by him, as the dreaming is another aspect of him, but he is just as much an aspect of the dreaming, so if things are gloomy, well, which is affecting the other more? Anyway, Morpheus finishes recreating the Corinthian, who says he awaits his command. And that's where we're leaving off for now. Come back next time for several characters going on quests, all the loose threads getting tied together, saying farewell to the Sandman, and saying hello to the Sandman.
It is nearly completed. What do you think?
It looks like the last one did.
Yeah, I tried some variations on the design, teeth nipples, teeth fingers, but honestly, I got it right the first time and we're going with it.
Hello, my friends. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications on new video releases. If you'd like to support future videos, you can check out my Patreon or purchase a t-shirt via Teespring or Shark Robot. Thanks for watching.